Yeah, everyone. So I wanted to do a video on Elden Ring. Specifically, why, whilst it's a great game, it's very far from perfect. And subsequently, why it isn't my favourite FromSoft game. So let's get started. First of all, I just want to say that Elden Ring is incredible. And it greatly improves on its predecessors in a number of ways. Not least of which is the massive open world. And that's not to say I didn't like the Dark Souls trilogy's linear design. I think that was also fantastic, and worked very well in some places, like in Dark Souls 1. The first half of the game was incredible. But having this massive open world that you can go anywhere in just made you feel so free. It made you feel like the world was lived in. And not only is this open world so free, but it's also so densely packed with like items and enemies and things to explore that I can guarantee that even after my numerous playthroughs and hundreds of hours, I can still find something new. Another thing I like is the stealth. They've actually incorporated it into its own system rather than kind of being neglected in the Dark Souls game. In the Dark Souls game, stealth weren't really a thing. You could occasionally slowly walk up behind an enemy and get a backstab, but that's the best you're going to get. In Elden Ring though, it's its own system, with a damage multiplier if the enemies don't know you're there, and it allows you to sneak up behind humanoid enemies for a backstab. This makes it so much more useful as well, because in some areas now, you can wipe out essentially every enemy without ever being spotted. Another thing they've done really well is the difficulty. Now, a big talking point about the Dark Souls games is the difficulty. Some people love it and some people hate it, but Elden Ring has sorted it very well. In the Dark Souls games, if you were stuck on a boss for example, there weren't much you could do about it. Chances are there weren't many, if any, other bosses you could go to. This meant your only option was just to keep trying until you got it. You could of course go and farm for levels, but usually that weren't very fun, as it meant re-going through areas you've already been through, likely a few times. In Elden Ring, if you couldn't beat a boss, there's numerous other bosses to kill and areas to explore to get more levels or equipment or upgrades for your weapons and whatnot. This is good as it suits everyone. The older FromSoft fans who like the difficulty are happy, but it's still a difficult game. But the newer ones who might like it a bit easier are also happy. There's a lot of things you can do to make it easier that are still fun. The combat is also fantastic because you've got more options than ever before. This means that no matter your playstyle, there's going to be something of interest to you, and something that suits how you want to play. The different attacks with each weapon also make it feel so realistic and interactive. Another big point is the Asher War system, which lets you put any weapon art on any weapon as long as it's of the same weapon class. This is good as well as it allows for so much more creativity and uniqueness in builds. In this big world as well, there's also a lot of different NPCs, each with their own questline. Most of them end up with the NPCs dying, but that's just the FromSoft special. Graphically, it's also incredible. Like, sometimes you just have to stop and stare at the view, because it's absolutely phenomenal. It's not all great though, something inevitably has to pull it down a little bit, which I'll talk about now. Remember when I was talking about the open world, how it was so massive and densely packed with things? Well, that comes with a downside. In the Dark Souls games, because they were so linear, if you're anything like me at least, you check every single corner and crevice, and you get essentially everything in the game. That just isn't the case in Elden Ring. You'll miss a lot, and that's just guaranteed. But you also find yourself intentionally skipping over a lot, just to get to the next site of grace. Because there's so much, it's inevitable that some things are similar, which I'll talk about more in a minute. But because of that, you're less inclined to investigate and explore more. So a lot of the things you just run past because you know you're not really going to get anything of value from them. This is a big problem and a massive shame, because through this playstyle you've took this beautiful, massive open world and made it linear. Now this isn't too much of a problem in your first playthrough, and maybe even the second one, but once you start doing multiple New Game Pluses, it becomes a big issue. Now this isn't a major problem, but it's something I just don't really like, and that's the overuse of the delayed attacks. Now delayed attacks were used in Dark Souls 3 for example, like the Nameless King, which happens to be actually my favourite boss in Dark Souls 3. But they were used sparingly throughout the entire game, and they were also only for a fraction of a second, just long enough to catch you off guard. That isn't really the case in Elden Ring. It feels like most bosses, and most enemies for that matter, have a delayed attack. And some of them are even excessively, or even comically, delayed. Like, I'm talking multiple seconds after you think it's going to hit. This makes some of the fights feel more of a guessing game than anything, and it can get really quite annoying. Now I want to talk a bit about the bosses, and I just wanted to say beforehand, before I start getting abused, that this is entirely my opinion, alright? There are a lot of bosses in Elden Ring, that's just a fact. And a lot more bosses than in Dark Souls 3, which is undeniably a good thing. However, I feel like this has made like the overall boss quality go down. And that's not to say Elden Ring don't have good bosses. I'd say most bosses in Elden Ring are good, but nothing to the extent of Dark Souls 3. Some of the bosses in Dark Souls 3, like Slave Knight Gale and Nameless King and Sister Frieda, are incredible. They are so fantastic, it's unbelievable. Compared to Elden Ring, where the bosses are just good and some are great, I suppose. It's just not on the same level. Speaking of bosses, a lot of them are reused, which is just natural, I suppose, of having so many different ruins and whatnot, but it's just a shame when you go into these tombs, which are already similar in of themselves, but then you get to the boss room and it's just a boss you've already fought multiple times before. But these really are just the two main complaints I have with it. Others are just more like nitpicks than anything. Now I can start talking about a few small things, like the PvP isn't very good, and the world can sometimes feel a bit empty. But like I said, these are more nitpicks, really, and I can't really go into much detail on them. So I think I'll just leave it at these two main issues. So, overall, is Elden Ring good? No. It's great. It's fantastic. Is it flawed? Yeah, of course it is. So's everything. Should you buy it? Is it worth playing? Yes. No matter what type of player you are, no matter what play style, no matter if you've played a FromSoft game before or not, there's going to be something here for you, and I cannot recommend it more. It's an incredible game, and despite its couple of flaws, overall, it's fantastic, and I highly recommend getting it. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.